do the pre. Hey everybody, I'm Ben Yee.
I'm Elissa Stein. And even though the election was already a couple of weeks ago, results are still coming in.
So they are.
And as Ben just mentioned between takes, we should always think about voting. You should never not think about voting. But I thought it would be really great to talk a little bit about two things. One, the continued blue wave.
Mm-hmm.
That, election night it was here, but more and more Democrats are being elected across the country. Even though we had to concede in Georgia and Florida.
Right.
But so talking about that a little bit, because I remember when I was growing up and it was election day and then people won or people lost and that was it. I wasn't aware of this long process that goes on and the recount and all
until
those...
2000 when Gore...
Right, and the hanging chads. But so I want to talk about that a little bit, but I also want to talk about voting in New York.
Yeah.
Like what's going on with voting in New York and what needs to change here. So
Sure.
First thing... why does it take so long? What is it? Why? How can in the past people say, oh, this person won, but now suddenly we're counting ballots from out of state or, the military from overseas? Like, how come this is now suddenly a much bigger thing than it used to be?
Yes, this is a great question. And some of it actually just has to do with rose-colored glasses. There's a famous newspaper of Truman holding up. Well, there's a famous photograph in the newspaper of Truman holding up that day's newspaper after his election that says Dewey defeats Truman, but he didn't. Truman defeated Dewey. And so the fact of the matter is that even though it might seem like in retrospect, all of these elections got decided on election night by a very honest and easy count, it's absolutely not the case. There have been situations like this throughout history. All it goes to show is that when lots of people vote, there are a lot of votes to count, and one vote can make a difference. Or really a couple of hundred votes makes a difference.
Right.
Because...
So is it more that the races are so close, and now since it's not a landslide, you have to make sure that you're counting everything because it could go either way?
That is one component of it. The other component is just the sheer number of people. One of the things about the United States is that its population has also grown substantially.
Which is great. Sheer numbers of people voting, great. People are obviously listening to us.
That must be it. That's the logical conclusion.
Yeah.
But so with more people voting and we might say processes which have not kept up with the times, then it becomes a very inefficient process of counting ballots, which is why after the 2000 election with the debacle in Florida, Congress
My mother was part of that debacle. She called me to say, I had trouble voting. There was something really weird going on and I'm not sure I even voted for the right person.
Right. And so after that, Congress passed HAVA, the Help America Vote Act.
I never even heard of that.
Well, it was
a little like halva, that really bad candy.
I guess that depends who you are. I kind of like halva, but it's not the worst candy.
Good to know now that the holidays are coming up.
No. I would prefer chocolate. Thanks, though.
Okay.
But they passed HAVA, which basically provided a bunch of money for upgrading
voting systems
and also required them to go electronic, which led to its own problem of people getting rid of things like paper ballots and having all of these hackable electronic systems, which created a new...
2016 Russians, we know you did it.
Which created a new set of problems that is riddling the American electoral system.
All right.
With
I'm just going to
issues.
say that when I went to vote at my my midterms in New York City, we're New York City people. We are better than this. So I go and I stand on this long line, and then I finally get to my place where I sign my book, and they hand me my sheet of my ballot in a folder, and the ballot is 2 pages.
Yeah.
Why it needs to be 2 pages, like I don't even understand.
Too many words.
So you have to rip it apart very neatly, because if you don't rip it apart neatly and it rips wrong, then you can't scan it in the scanner.
They'll reject it, yep.
Right. But there was nowhere that it told you how to rip it. So there are all these people ripping their ballots across the wrong way or not understanding how to rip it. Then you have to go stand on then you stand in a booth and fill your thing out, and then stand on another line to get to the scanner.
There were long lines,
some of which were broken.
Yeah.
And then perhaps it's because of this ballot that's this long that you had to rip in half and feed through. It was the most ridiculous, not even comedy of errors And it was catastrophically bad.
Right.
So to think that electronic voting was supposed to somehow make things better, it's made it so much more time consuming, so many more areas where things could go wrong. It was, line after line. It was crazy. And now I was speaking to our state senator, Brad Hoylman, in front of the polling place. And he was saying that voting reform is one of the top things he wants to talk about now that there's a blue Senate in Albany. Because in the 2020 election, it's going to be much more, so many more people will vote.
There'll be higher turnout.
Right.
One of the big things
this was a disaster for a midterm.
Regarding the ballot specifically, one of the big things that happened with HAVA was, HAVA and the legislation in the states that followed the 2000 election was a lot of restrictions and requirements were placed on election systems, processes, and the ballots themselves. So you ended up having states say things like, the font must be such and such large. The ballot may only be such and such long.
And this is by each state, they individually just make these decisions?
They make these decisions, and as a result, here in New York, that is one of the reasons why you can't have a long, people are like, why don't we have a long ballot? Well, that's illegal. You need to have a ballot that's a certain length, that's a certain size, with a certain font type. And so now, boards of elections, when you have a lot of candidates, and you have ballot referenda, you're like, well, what do we do? Okay, well, we'll flip it, and we'll do the flip thing. Okay, well, that causes its own problems. So some of the laws that were passed after the 2000 election to try and rectify problems just created new problems because people didn't foresee that. And insofar as election reform, as Senator Hoylman was saying, one of the main benefits of that is you don't have everybody showing up to the poll location on the same day. The Board of Elections, while it may, one could argue whether or not they're good at their job or highly competent, what we can certainly say is they have a very big thing to do and they don't get to test it. They get to do it once. And so if you have something new, like ballots that need to be ripped, and scanners that need to accept 2 ballots from each person, and you've never done that before, then it would be sort of odd to expect it to go well if you had no dry runs. But if you had early voting, so you could vote over a series of days, this happened in I think it was in Pennsylvania or something recently. There was an issue with the voting machine, and people were like, this is misleading. And what did they do? Well, it was misleading, and because they had days of running it, the Secretary of State or the Board of Elections was basically like, well, we'll just put out a notification on all the poll sites to alert people to this problem.
Right. And we don't do that in New York because we have to vote that day.
Yeah, well, that's a ridiculous thing as well, anyway.
Right. Well, hopefully, so I guess we're going to wrap this up by saying good news that the Senate is blue in Albany, and hopefully these are the kinds of things that will change. And a revamping of the Board of Elections, which seems to be just a mess. And my vote, if I had a vote, is go back to the lever. Just go back to that curtain with the lever, and you tick down the boxes, and you know exactly who you're voting for, and you pull it that way, and your vote registers, and you're done.
And the last thing I'll say about anything is that the Board of Elections is staffed by the political parties, not the government, so it's not the civil service, which is one of the reasons it's sort of messed up. And you should vote in your party elections for county committee and district leaders, which are coming up in Staten Island and Manhattan this year.
Next
so vote.
Year. Well, actually next year.
Oh, 2019. Sorry, it's still 2018.
Right. But
next year.
Conceptually, we're in 2019. Yeah, so that's the next thing that we're going to be hawking voting about. And we are both county committee members. So, yeah, we're going to ask you to jump on that bandwagon next time.
Laters.
Thanks for watching.
If you liked what you saw, please like the video too, and then share it.
With everyone you know.
Yeah, that.